here presenting with Brett Roberts from Dremio, and we're going to show you how to go from data to dashboard using Dremio Cloud and Preset Cloud. A little bit about me. I was a data engineer for 3.5 years before I became a developer relations engineer here at Preset. My first 2 years I spent at a marketing tech startup where I had a fundamental role in sort of shaping the team, its practices, and how it operated internally. And then another 1.5 years in more senior data engineering roles at an internal team in Palantir, and then as a tech lead for data engineering at an e-commerce firm. Brett is a principal solutions architect over at Dremio with years of experience in big data. He even hosts his own podcast, The Big Data Beard. Definitely go and check that out to get a little bit more insight into someone who's been in this industry for a while. So a little bit about Superset. Superset is a modern open source BI platform that works with nearly any SQL speaking data engine. This is why Dremio was one of the perfect partners to showcase this demo with today. It provides a large diversity of charts for all your visualization needs. So there are typically two main workflows within Superset. The first being Explore, which provides you with a no-code chart builder. Superset generates SQL queries on the user's behalf, and this is all via SQL Alchemy. Typically, these are going to be your data consumers and just the people interested in sort of gaining some insight from your data without having to be too technical. The other is typically supported through SQL Lab, which provides a full SQL IDE, and Superset users create the queries, and these are untouched by the Superset or Preset backend, and they are run against the target database that Superset is connected to. This is going to be more typically used by your data engineers and your data scientists, as well as your more technical data explorers. Preset Cloud is a multi-workspace cloud-hosted Apache Superset with all of the things that you've come to love about Superset included. They layer on with SOC 2 compliance, and user documentation is provided, as well as controls like row-based access control and single sign-on. There's also Preset Managed Private Cloud, which is Preset's BI platform within your AWS private cloud. It has all of the same capabilities as Preset Cloud, as well as additional enterprise support. And now a little bit about why Superset and Dremio.
Across the globe, some of the largest organizations, including 5 of the Fortune 10, and just tons of customers are turning to Dremio today to solve that challenge, which is they have a ton of data that they need to query in very fast response times, and traditional architectures that we'll talk about on the next slide don't really support that. And really, there's 3 core tenets or concepts that this data lakehouse platform provides. One is our goal is to provide a SQL capability for everyone. Whether you're the data consumer and business user or a data engineer, we want you to be able to have a self-service access to either write SQL or leverage Dremio's user interface to create SQL transformations and leverage SQL to query your data. Just like Preset, Dremio has a fully managed SaaS offering called Dremio Cloud. And it's the best of both worlds, where your data still sits inside your VPC or within your data lake. Dremio manages the engines that query that data, and then manages the control plane that interacts and interfaces with your BI tools like Superset and Preset. It also handles security and all the other critical functions that you need for a query engine. And then our goal is to allow you to have one interface to interact with data from multiple data lake sources, whether that's S3, ADLS, on-prem, and in addition to databases and other data warehouses as well. And to be able to federate and join that data and correlate that data to have a more enriched experience when you're querying and performing your analytics. So that's just a quick overview on Dremio. If you're interested in learning more or haven't heard of Dremio until today, I highly encourage you to check out dremio.com to get a little bit more deep dive into what we do. But our approach to how do we support and enable enterprise BI is really, manifested in what organizations have done for, the last decade or even before that. And traditionally, I think organizations have solved the idea of landing data into a data lake. And there's still some challenges with that, but for the most part, the data lake has become that de facto landing spot for the majority of data out there. But where organizations have historically struggled is, how do I get the data lake, or how do I get the data from the data lake into the hands of my data consumers? And what's been done is, complex and brittle pipelines to get the data into a data warehouse. And even then, for performance reasons or just the size of the data sets, data engineers have had to create additional pipelines or additional cubes and extracts and aggregations. So you get a very complex, very costly security and governance nightmare architecture that at scale is just not tenable. And so what Dremio does with our architecture is we connect directly to the data lake, whether, again, any of your data lakes on-prem or in the cloud. And then we provide a live native connection to your BI tools of choice. So data consumers can directly query the data in SQL off the data lake. We provide performance and performance acceleration technologies called reflections and caching, and then use Apache Arrow to accelerate query performance. And then we also provide a self-service semantic layer so that the data consumers themselves can actually interact with the data on the lake and not have to wait for the data engineering team or the data team that's historically been backlogged to provide them with that report or cube or data source for them to do their job. Excuse me. So just setting the table here, let's actually see this in action and see how we can use Dremio and preset to query a data source that's in the data lake. And for this demo purpose today, what we're going to show you is I actually think one of the cooler data sets that I've seen that's public, which is a Yelp data set. I'm a big, restaurant and food fan. I like to, see all the different reviews and ratings. And to be honest, I've rated a few restaurants myself back in the day. So we've taken a Yelp data set that's a JSON file from a public source, and we have moved that data into our Amazon S3 data lake. And so in this demo, you're going to see how Dremio can interact with that data in S3. We can add you some transformations, do some joins, prepare that data, and then connect that data to preset to run our analytics and visualizations. So without further ado, I'm going to get out of the slides and I'm going to get into the demo. So before we actually just show Dremio, this is the Yelp data set. If you want to play around with it yourself, you can absolutely just go to yelp.com/dataset. You can sign up and download the data set. It's a couple JSON files. I think one of them was a little bit over 5 gigs, one was 3 gigs. So fairly decent sized files that took me a little bit of time to download with my internet connection the way it is. But fairly, again, when we talk about scalable or enterprise BI at scale, we want to look at these massive data sets and massive tables. Okay, so now that we've kind of looked at the data set, let's go to Dremio. And this is our Dremio cloud instance. And just to orient you to what you're seeing here, we have 3 areas on the Dremio home screen. Right here on the middle left, you have sources. So this is where you create your connections to your data lake and database sources. And if you see here, you have options to connect to Amazon S3. You can also connect to ADLS and other object storage data lakes as well, Glue Catalog, and then other databases here. And it's very simple to create that connection where you just name your data source, you authenticate it either using your access key and secret or an IAM policy. And then you can also set reflection and metadata refresh policies as well. But it's very easy all through the UI to create your source. And we've already done that for the purposes of today, where we have connected to an S3 bucket in a data lake that we built specifically for this demo that has our Yelp sample data. So if we click in here and we drill down, you can see these are all the different JSON files that we used. After exploring some of these, we thought the business file and the review file and tip file were the most exciting. And what we did once we determined that that's what we wanted in Dremio, we created what we call a physical data set. So the physical data set is really just a table view of this JSON file. So Dremio knows, and if we were updating this table or this file, Dremio could update this table accordingly based on its refresh policy. But you can see here within the physical data set, all the different fields that are in this file. On top of sources, where we make our data lake connections, we have spaces. And one of the things I mentioned briefly in the slides, again, wanted to really hammer it in this demo, is the idea of a semantic layer and the ability to really allow organizations to take a step further in democratizing how data consumers interact with the data on the lake. And spaces is one of the foundations for that semantic layer, because you can now set a file or folder directory that and apply permissions to users or organizations so that certain teams can access certain views of the data, and certain teams can access other views of the data. So maybe Brett Roberts in sales can only access North America sales data for this particular time period in a certain view. But maybe one of my counterparts in Europe can only access the European sales. And you can set that by creating these folders. And organizations do this a number of different ways. Here we have some raw data folders and curated data. So as the data kind of goes through its data wrangling life cycle, it can move into a different folder. We also have folders built for different organizations and teams within this fictional company. And then in the middle here, you just have your personal space where I can create views, I can interact with the data and play with it, but not share that publicly yet. Maybe what I'm working on is not ready for prime time yet. So I don't want to have to deal with people working or asking questions about it. I just want to work on building that view or cleaning up that data, and then I'll share it in the spaces. A couple other just cool things that I think really do help accelerate and drive success within preset and superset is this idea of being super elastic and scalable with how you set your query engines for Dremio. So think of Dremio at its heart on the query side as being a scale out MPP, where you can have multiple engines that can run a query and then return the results. And you can be very granular on how you set those engines up. So for example, you can see here we have an engine that has eight engines running right now, and we set that at all times there's going to be a minimum replica of 1 and no more than 10 replicas. I can edit this to scale down. So maybe Brett Roberts doesn't need that much compute power. So maybe I only need 4 engines or 2 engines. And maybe because I don't query as often at night, I don't need 1 replica always running. I can change that to 0. So you can really be dynamic with how you set these engines based on your TCO needs with Dremio. It allows you to very quickly scale up resources or scale out resources when you need it, and then scale them down when you're not using it or in periods of inactivity. Okay, so now we've just given you a quick overview into Dremio's UI. Let's actually take a look at this Yelp data set. And like I said before, when we went into our data lake bucket, we had a couple different purple tables here. We also have, let's just go in this curated folder, because what we took was a couple of those tables and we already joined them together. And this is a table that was a join that we did in Dremio. And you can see here, this was the SQL that Dremio wrote to create that join. I didn't write that SQL. Dremio did it through the UI based on a SQL inner join. But this is the table that we have built that for the purposes of running analysis on correlating businesses and overall business reviews with historical review data. So as a data analyst, I can go into Dremio. I can start to search for or find data sets that meet my needs. And then I can connect those to Superset and Preset. So this table here, we have the name of the restaurant. It is lunchtime in Boston, so all this is making me super hungry. The city, the state, zip code. We have some geospatial information, ratings. So this is all very rich information. We even have the category restaurant, business ID, which is what we used as that inner join field. And then, so that's all the business information. And then on the review side, we have all the different individual reviews, the number of stars in that review, the reaction from the Yelp community, the actual review itself, right? This is the McDonald's that's closest. This was my fiance's favorite place. All these, individual text reviews, and then the date that review was made. So as an analyst, I think this is a pretty rich data set that I would want to start to create my analysis and build some dashboards on. So once we've identified what that, that this is the right data set, we can actually go into preset and we can create a connection from preset to Dremio using SQL Alchemy. And we'll talk about how to create that connection in a minute. We've already done that for the purposes of this part of the demo. So we already have a connection, and you can see here that we've connected to that Yelp and business data set. So now we're here and we're going to start to build a visualization. I think we go all out and start with a map. I want to see the where all these reviews have come from, where all the businesses are. So we're going to build a map. We're going to take longitude and have that be longitude. Same thing with latitude to latitude. And let's just start and create that. And you can see that we return the visualization super quick. And if you go back to Dremio actually, and you just do this, this is, I think, just over or just shy of 7 million records that are here. Now I know that preset's going to be running. Yeah. So this is just shy of 7 million records that we have in this data set. So when we go back here, we can even do things like expand this to a 50-row limit. We'll update the chart. And you can see here that we have a nice plotting of all the different locations where these reviews come from. So Philadelphia, New Orleans, looks like Nashville, was that St. Louis, Indianapolis. So, it's a smattering of different cities. I think we can get a little bit more granular in this visualization though. Let's put a filter on here that does it by, some of these places might have 1 or 2 ratings. I always like to look at the review count before I go to a restaurant, because one rating that's a 5 doesn't necessarily mean it's the best restaurant ever. So let's just do 150 reviews or more. And then let's actually do the color based on the review, the overall rating of the restaurant. So getting a little more granular here, we're going to run this. And you can see that we have returned the visualization and the analysis or the query very quickly. And if we scroll into Philadelphia, which looks like it has a nice cluster of reviews, you can see here that all of the different reviews based on the actual rating 1 through 5 that is in Yelp for that restaurant. So I wanted to share this just to kind of show a growing or gradually more complex query that we're creating by changing the parameters in Superset. If we go back to Dremio, you can actually go into our jobs tab, and this job tab just shows all the different queries that are being run. And you can see that this is my user. These are all the ones that I just ran, this one being the most recent. Then if you look at the job, this is the data set with a limit of 10,000. And you can see that we used a reflection, which I'll talk about in a second. But the thing to note is that the duration of that query, and again, it's 7 million records, was just shy, just a tenth over a second, which is super fast. And again, this is a Dremio cloud instance that's on the West Coast, talking to a preset cloud instance that's in a different data center. So we're seeing super fast response times with this, which is super exciting, because the last thing any data user wants is to try and run a visualization, then have to go get a cup of coffee, go get lunch, come back, and it's still spinning. So I talked about what this reflection is. This reflection, a reflection in Dremio is a materialized view of the data. It's the way that Dremio does a pre-calculation of the data set. And when a query is kicked off in Dremio, Dremio's analyzer determines whether or not it's going to leverage that pre-calculation reflection or query the raw data. Based on this reflection, it decided that based on this query, it decided that the reflection would return the results faster at a lower cost. So it decided to use that reflection. You can set reflections in Dremio based on the virtual data set itself. So you can see here in this business and Yelp virtual data set that we have a reflection set up that does pre-calculations on all of these dimensions and all of these measures. And it saves that 500 meg view on the data lake. So it's still querying data on the data lake, but it's a pre-calculation that Dremio has written. You don't always need to use a reflection. It does help accelerate it. This query probably would take 4 or 5 seconds if the reflection wasn't used. So I think that's just a quick insight into Dremio and how Dremio can help accelerate the BI on preset and superset. I'm going to hand it back to you if you want to go into the dashboarding and some of the cool things that we did to show this analysis at scale with multiple visualizations in a dashboard being run at one time.
Yep. So let me just share one more time here. And the one thing that we also just wanted to show is just how quickly and easily you can kind of connect your Dremio cloud to preset cloud. It's literally a matter of generating like a personal access token within Dremio, and also just grabbing your project ID, all of which can be found within your account settings here. You won't see my personal access token because that's gone, but that's where you would generate it and get that from. So a quick look at sort of the dashboard and the kind of charts that we can create. So Brett sort of showed one of the maps. This is what we call a map box within preset. It'll just show sort of like each of these clusters and the counts of how many of the businesses were reviewed there. The one thing about the Yelp data set is it's specifically for certain metropolitan areas, which is why you're not really seeing too many like restaurants out in New York or something, because they've specifically designated these slots for this open data set. A couple of just bar graphs where we can actually count the number of businesses per state and province. You can clearly see we have some Canadian businesses up here that were being reviewed. We can also count all of the reviews by state. And this is also a pretty difficult query to run, given just how many reviews there are, each review being tied to a single user per business. We can then even sort of create this tree map view where we can count just the average number of reviews per business. And I'll talk a little bit about why this was interesting to see once we get to the dashboard itself. And then just another fun thing is just seeing like, okay, what were the number of franchises that were being reviewed? Franchises here being the way the business is structured, they have their own name and their business ID. So we were actually able to see how many unique business IDs shared the same name. I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with like Domino's or Dunkin' Donuts, so I won't speak too much about that. And one thing here is we actually have a link to our dashboard. It'll open up right there so we can sort of see it. So the first thing, I'll start with this table on the right, the businesses by number of reviews. This is a pretty standard sort of bread and butter, like just table visualization. It's not anything new from what you would have seen Brett already show. It's a simple, just selecting the couple of columns that we want and just grouping them by these fields that we care the most about. So configuring that, we can actually go straight to edit chart and you can see sort of what we put in. It's not too difficult. We just dragged and dropped each of our columns that we cared about, and we were just able to generate the query. So I can just get rid of one of these and put it right back in so we can actually see that update here. It's a simple, and we get our little sample here, just a simple how many reviews per business and where that business itself was located. This one was also built off of the original physical data set that shows up after you connect to Dremio, which I meant to show here actually. So that connection string, you would just actually select Dremio right from this drop down right here. And you could just put in your dialect, you can just put in that URL, test the connection, and it would show up. For the demo purposes, we're not going to do that because we already have Dremio here. But
I did put the doc in the chat, the docs, if you want to, if anyone is interested, that gives you that URL string to use and where to get your personal access token in Dremio.
Yeah, it literally takes like 5 seconds to set something like that up. So within the data sets themselves, then we can actually go in here. So preset sees this as a physical data set. This business plus Yelp reviews data set is the physical data set that we saw over here within Dremio itself, where all of our visualizations are sort of built off of that. And let me just find where I was. Yeah, so this was and then we also have a couple of virtual data sets, and we'll go into what those are. But virtual data sets essentially live in Superset's thin sort of semantic layer, where we can write queries that will directly run against our target database and create these virtual data sets for us to also visualize from. And one of those, for example, is right here. So we wanted to count the number of unique businesses reviewed per state and province. And I can go into edit chart here so we can actually see what all of this looks like. So one of the things here is we can actually view the query that generates this in our SQL lab, like we mentioned earlier. And this is also pretty simple. It's just looks like, yeah, it's just running a select star on this. But one second, hold on. And what this chart itself does is it counts the distinct business IDs. So we have a metric in place here already. And what we can do is we can go right here to the simple column. We can grab the business ID, which we know is unique to each of the businesses, and we can just run, you don't need to run a count distinct. We can also run a count. So for this purpose, I can show that. We can just save that. And if we update the chart, we can see all of the businesses counted here. And this does have a row limit to it. So, and just for some explanation, XMS is, some people were reviewing some businesses in Liverpool. So XMS, I'm not just too sure about the, I guess, demographics of England over here. So state, province, whatever you want to call it, is what Liverpool is a part of. And this is what would generate that count of businesses for us. Count of reviews per state is also pretty similar to this. If we view the query, we can also see what we're doing. So this one actually does utilize one of the virtual data sets. So I'll go into edit chart and show that in SQL Lab. Where if we view this in SQL Lab itself, there we go. We're actually running this query against Dremio's database here, where what we're doing is we're selecting all of our distinct business IDs one more time as a CTE, and this is all in the preset semantic layer itself. And then we can perform our aggregate functions. So the one thing to note here is the semantic layer is intentionally thin, and it is meant for these last minute sort of analyses or last mile sort of transformation. So if this was something, if you were to abide by best practices for your data, this is something that you could potentially move into Dremio if you knew that this was this was like a dashboard or a specific metric that your business users or your consumers are going to consistently use. But for the purposes of the demo, or just if it was sort of their job to run this analysis within the visualization layer, Preset provides this tool that you can use. And because our underlying database here is Dremio, it runs just as fast against the Dremio data set. We can actually see that right here. We have our aggregate query run and working here. And the same way, what we did was because we already returned this sum of total reviews as our total reviews within the chart itself, our metric was just the max of total reviews, and we get this configuration out of it. Both of those led to creating this average number of reviews per business in state. And what I found interesting about this was you might think that somewhere like Pennsylvania, where you have like 35K unique businesses reviewed, you might see more reviews per business on average, but that doesn't turn out to be the case. A place like Louisiana actually seems to have about 74 reviews per business, where they only have probably like a third of what you see coming out of Pennsylvania. And this lets you maybe come up with some interesting like correlations or causations. Like Louisiana is sort of known for their food, right? Lots of people go to New Orleans. They're probably more willing to rate what they're experiencing. Because like Brett mentioned, people like to review the places they go to, but typically it's either because it's really good or really bad. If you have like a mediocre experience, what's the point of like leaving that review there? And if you were to drill down a little further, I guess I didn't create the dashboard here, you would actually see, if you were to sort these sort of reviews by how high the rating is per location, Louisiana on average has by far like over like 4 stars as an average review. kind
Yeah.
of aligns well with what I know about, food culture from the US.
I used to live in Philadelphia. I'm from Pennsylvania or close to Pennsylvania. I can imagine that the average rating from maybe Philadelphia might be a little bit lower than Louisiana, just based on that. But it's funny.
There's
I've actually been to Biscuit Love in the Gulch, one of the ones in the table there, and it's delicious. Just FYI, everyone.
I was just gonna say there's only so many Philly cheesesteak places I guess get around to reviewing. But one of the so this tree map is a really cool way to sort of visualize that, and that's why I kind of put these side by side so you can sort of tell that story. And of course, an end user would be a little better at that. But one thing we can also see is just like sort of the query that's being run, and now we're seeing like our queries are kind of ramping up on our side. And again, none of this is being run or touched by the preset superset backend. All of this, you can literally see it within your job. Like if I were to go in and edit this chart one more time. And the reason I'm doing the edit charts is because I didn't actually save these queries themselves, because you can see the data set that it was generated off of is created via this query. That's why it's opening each one back up again. But essentially, you can write these queries, save them within. And clearly, if you're someone like me, you didn't remember to save your written queries and stuff, very easy way to come back and find your work. All of these data sets were already there. The queries were saved as the backend query behind that visualization. So now we can drill down a little further where essentially we reuse the two queries where we found our number of businesses per state and we counted the number of reviews per state. And then we can just select again from those two CTEs and just sort of join on state and see the final count, which runs again on all of that data that we saw before. And there we go. We get to see just how many businesses per average are getting reviewed at these particular locations.
Yeah, I think what's just kind of to note though, like everything you're doing, and it's kind of interesting, like you're explaining every single dashboard, every single chart, and kind of showing the nuance of it. But every time you change one of those parameters, like we're not waiting seconds or minutes for this to return. Like it's really, really happening at the speed of your talking, right? The speed of thought, which is super impactful when you're trying to build and modify and create these visualizations and dashboards.
That's exactly correct. And one of the things then, once you can do that, once we generate this query, we can also see like our table view itself is presented to us. So we know this is just a simple two column table with average reviews per business and state. And all we need to do to use it with our tree map visualization is select our dimension as state. And because we already calculated our average reviews per business, we can just drop that in as our metric, just grab the max value from there. And you can hit update chart one more time to actually see that work. And one of the cool things here is we can actually also see this cached feature within preset. Preset kind of knows that, okay, this data hasn't changed, so we don't need to continuously refresh or change what we're doing here. Unless I were to go out here and like force, I can also recache this itself. Or if I were to actually make a full change here, you'd see the update chart option also actually light up there, and it would ask you to update that chart one more time. But I can grab this from here, save that, and the update chart comes right back to remind you to do that. This looks a little strange. Oh, there we go. Cool. And then the last one, which I thought was just a fun visualization too. This one was just a quick little bubble diagram that kind of shows the largest number of franchises by the number of locations and reviews. So that was one thing, even when, I jumped into this data set, I never even thought about that. Like, oh, people are out here reviewing individual McDonald's, individual Burger Kings. One Domino's might be better than the other Domino's. That's why you pick the one near you. So this was also a pretty cool visualization just to see where people are going more often than not. And this one was also another one of these complicated queries where what we did was we actually selected all of our franchises out. We counted each of the franchises themselves within the CTEs. We're selecting out the same logic where we summed up those reviews. and then we're joining it, but we only care about where our number of locations is greater than 1. And the way we did that again was by checking the name and the business ID, but we care that the name plus business ID combo, there's a count greater than 1 here. For the sake of visualization, and I'll show you just how this chart is configured rather than the query itself, because we just saw that. For the sake of visualization, I actually had to filter out our number of locations to be greater than 185, because that was actually the bottom end for a lot of these franchises. If I could actually reconfigure this and kind of show just how crazy that number can get. If I were to put number of locations simply greater than 1, for example, which is really what the definition of a franchise should be. 1, and then hit enter here, save that. We have our limits already sort of built in here. If we hit update chart, we'll actually see way too much. And 185 seemed to be the sweet spot where it kind of got the point across, but. And again, we can actually see this runs through every single row once again, and it runs the query pretty quickly. The visualization looks like it might take a minute here to load up just because how many bubbles there might be. Probably should have stress tested this one.
It's always fun to do it live. Come on.
Yeah. Okay. So I should have stress tested that, but this should just kind of show just how large the data set itself is that it can do something like this. On the other hand, we know that this query successfully ran against Dremio, since at least we saw this sample data, like the sample data show up right at the bottom. So I'm just going to exit that one. We still have our chart here, so I can just reopen it to the configuration. But yeah, so I'll leave this greater than or equal to 185 because that filter itself makes a big difference in the query itself that is run. And we can also see that this was cached 5 hours ago. So unless you go and like you break this just the way I did, you should be good and you should be able to see this sort of bubble chart there for you. Our entity just being the name of the locations, our x-axis just being the number of locations itself, and the y-axis, the bubble, actually being represented by the number of total reviews here. And that is it from the visualization side. There's much more I'm sure that you can do with this data. A lot of the use cases you can do, you can run things like sentiment analysis off of the actual text itself. And that could be something for us to build on later. I'm sure given just how powerful Dremio is as this underlying database, we can run like search filters for positive sentiment words and all of that within the review text itself. And this has its own like data science machine learning use cases, not just sort of if I was thinking, oh, I'm a business analyst who needs to sort of just measure and visualize all of this random Yelp data. You can do some more stuff with it. This was just to provide that like high level overview for everyone watching.
That's awesome. Hey, so I just want to kind of, if you're interested in, I think playing with both Dremio and Preset, the beauty is that we do have both free versions that you can download or you can sign up for. With Dremio, you can go to app.dremio.cloud, and I put this in the chat already. But you can sign up for free, and you can use Dremio, the free version, for life. Unlimited number of queries, users, data connections, and we also have a sample set in the in our Dremio cloud instance. So if you actually go into Dremio, and you can see here, you can add a source that's a sample. And we already did this, but these samples are for anybody. And there's some pretty cool data there. There's taxi data, there's weather data, there's within Dremio University, there's a ton of different like employees and Airbnb data. There are all these different data sets that you can actually promote, right? So you can click on this one and you can promote this from a CSV into a physical data set. And then you can actually, once you have that physical data set, you can do some transformations, you can do some joins. Like for example, here we didn't put the first row as the header. So you can fix all that through the UI. You can change this from a string to a, again, for the purpose of this, just show that you can do it to an integer, you can apply that. Dremio writes all the SQL for you. but you can do all of this with sample data set. You don't have to pay for anything. And you can really start to explore Dremio and then connect that to preset and start building some cool dashboards and, asking questions of your data. So I did just want to make sure that you were all aware. Just go to app.dremio.com to see that.
And just like Brett mentioned, Preset also has a forever free tier just for up to 5 users, and it's the same thing. Get started right away. You get one workspace, and hopefully that'll show you just why you might want Preset Cloud after you have all your 5 users in that one workspace kind of doing these things. And you can also find out more about this all at preset.io.
So does anyone have any questions? I think you can put questions in the chat or in the question. All right, I don't see anything. Well, if you do have any questions, you can reach out to me at brett.roberts@dremio.com for any Dremio related questions.
And just Shreesh at preset.io for preset related questions.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been great to spend time working on building this dashboard with you, playing with the data, and then obviously presenting today. So thank you so much for the opportunity. And, really do love working with you all and love using Superset and Preset.
And Dremio was, you coming from that data engineering background, this was my first time using Dremio as a database. Pretty cool stuff. And if you're one of those engineers as well, probably should go check that out.
Absolutely. Well, have a good day, everyone.